This is the Speaking of Writers podcast. I'm Steve Richards. History often remembers great leaders for the battles they fought and the speeches they delivered, of course, but behind many of history's defining moments are relationships that change the course of events. Today, we're joined by New York Times bestselling historian Jonathan W. Jordan, whose remarkable new book, Ike and Winston, World War, Cold War, and an Extraordinary Friendship, explores the extraordinary bond between General Dwight D. Eisenhower and British Prime Minister Winston Churchill. Through years of exhaustive research, Jonathan reveals how two men from vastly different worlds forged a friendship built on trust, loyalty, disagreement, and mutual respect. One that helped guide the Allied victory in World War II and influence the fragile peace that followed. Jonathan is also the best-selling author of Brothers, Rivals, Victors, a regular book critic for the Wall Street Journal, and one of today's foremost military historians. I'm happy to have, for the very first time, Jonathan joined me here on the Speaking of Writers podcast. Welcome.
Steve, terrific to be here. And this is, you've had a lot of great topics, big leaders that you've talked about, and I'm glad to join the ranks of your guests.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. So what first drew you to the relationship between Eisenhower and Churchill, and what made you realize there was a larger story waiting to be told here?
Well, the two characters, Dwight Eisenhower and Winston Churchill, are of course big names in history, but nobody's ever really looked at the way they worked together and their personal friendship. We hear about what they did during World War II, and there is some of that, the camaraderie. But the way two people who were extraordinarily talented and had very large egos could set aside their differences, their differences in backgrounds, their differences in countries and the trajectories of those countries, and work together for the common good was something that I've always been fascinated with. It's been a thread throughout most of my history writing about how people can set aside differences, whether it's professional or personal or just likes and dislikes, and work together. That's something that I don't think we see often enough. And in the introduction, you referred to their relationship is built on, among other things, disagreements. And the idea that we can disagree with someone but still really like them is a quality exemplified by both Eisenhower and Churchill. And it just happened to be one that affected the rest of the 20th century more than any other friendship.
Most people know these men as iconic leaders, of course. What surprised you most about them as human beings during your research?
I think the two things that surprised me more than anything were, in the case of Eisenhower, his cold-blooded, calculating nature. Now, Ike was a card player from his youth. He used to play poker until he won so much money and embarrassed so many of his friends that he swore off poker and began to play bridge. He was the kind of guy who was very calculating. And his son, John Eisenhower, one time said that his dad was 50% kindly grandfather, 50% cold-blooded calculator. And then John thought about it and he said, make that 75% cold-blooded. Eisenhower was kind of the genial guy we think of playing golf in the 1950s, the smiling, I like Ike face. But he had a very cold side. And for him, when duty required him to step on a friend, he would step on a friend. And so he was very, very cold-blooded about that. Winston Churchill, what surprised me more than anything was what a romantic he was. He was the type of person who could see big things in the future. He looked at the world through an artist's eye, and that could drive him to tears. It could drive him to panic. It could drive him to perform really great deeds. And whether that was opposing communism in the early 30s, opposing Hitler in the 30s and 40s, or trying to get the two sides, America and the Soviet Union, together without incinerating themselves. Those were the kinds of things that the romantic in him impelled him to do.
You described them as an unlikely pair. How quickly did mutual respect evolve into genuine friendship?
It took place, I think, realistically over the course of mostly between mid of 1942 to the end of 1943. When they first met, it was 3 weeks after Pearl Harbor, and Eisenhower met Churchill as basically the aide de camp to the Secretary of War Henry Stimson, who was the real guy Churchill wanted to talk to. And Eisenhower was just there to hold maps and answer any questions that they had. And Eisenhower always remembered that meeting, that first meeting, and it was in the White House in the Rose Room with Winston Churchill. Churchill didn't remember that at all. He later wrote in his memoirs that he first met Ike in June 1942. In the middle of 42, Eisenhower was sent to North Africa. They began working pretty closely together. Then Ike went off to North Africa to lead the Torch invasion, to liberate the northern part of the continent. And they saw each other somewhat frequently, but they had to write a lot, and they communicated a good bit. They began, when they saw each other in person, it was usually when Churchill was traveling down to Algiers, to Eisenhower's headquarters. And over that time, they had a lot of late nights, a lot of slight disagreements. Eisenhower wasn't really pushing back until the fall of 1943. And a lot of dinners and drinks and conversations. And over that, I think the relationship became more than transactional. It wasn't just about the First Minister of the British Empire and the commanding general of the Mediterranean Theater of Operations. It started to take on the qualities of a friendship.
World War II, of course, demanded enormous decisions every day. Were there moments where they fundamentally disagreed, and how did those disagreements actually strengthen rather than weaken their partnership?
They had plenty of disagreements, and they really started in the fall of 1943. Churchill wanted to go invade islands in the Aegean Sea, and Eisenhower thought that was a ridiculous waste of human lives and money and equipment. And he told Churchill so, and because he was the theater commander, his military judgment, Eisenhower's military judgment, meant a lot. And Churchill would always kind of grouse about that. He would be pouting years later when he wrote his war memoirs, but he didn't let that turn into a big disagreement. They had vehement disagreements over things like whether to bomb the French railways before D-Day. That was going to cost a lot of human lives, French civilian lives, and Churchill felt that that was a very bad thing for the Allies to do. Even though Eisenhower was saying we need to destroy those French railways to give our troops on Normandy beaches a better chance to continue the fight to liberate the continent. They fought over whether to invade Berlin and whether Eisenhower should send Patton to capture Prague in Czechoslovakia. They fought about an invasion of southern France. But through it all, they assured each other repeatedly that their personal feelings and admiration for each other hadn't changed. Both of them were men who would not let a disagreement over policy or politics get in the way of a good friendship. As president, Eisenhower would regularly have drinks with Sam Rayburn or Lyndon Johnson, the two leading Democrats, even though Ike was a Republican at that point. Winston Churchill maintained a friendship with his successor, Clement Attlee, the opposition party leader who inflicted Churchill's most humiliating electoral defeat. Nonetheless, Churchill maintained a relationship with him, and Attlee was a pallbearer at Churchill's funeral later. They just didn't like to let a good friendship get spoiled by politics, and they almost never did.
Churchill is remembered as one of history's greatest orators, while Eisenhower was known for calm, measured leadership. How did those contrasting styles complement each other?
You know, Ike was always a good sort of measured type person. Churchill approached things from the sweeping arc of history. approach. He was the one who would fight on the beaches. He was the one who talked about their finest hour. And Eisenhower, one of his speechwriters, said was just death on superlatives. Ike had worked for a long time for Douglas MacArthur, who was always saying things like, never in the history of human conflict has, and things like that. And I thought that kind of hyperbole didn't make a whole lot of sense. He liked to talk to the guy in the ground. He liked to talk to sergeants. He liked to talk to the American voters. He could talk to pretty much anyone at any level of history, but he was a very a plain speaker, very direct person. And there's two speaking styles were never going to be similar. Winston Churchill would speak from notes, and he would not hide his notes. He would hold his notes up. He would wave them to his audience, and he would drop them to the floor when he was done. Eisenhower liked to speak from the heart and liked to memorize speeches in advance, and but usually was at his best when just talking to a group, whether it's the 101st Airborne about to jump into Normandy beaches, or whether it was King George VI.
One of the fascinating aspects of the book is watching the balance of power shift after the war. How did their friendship change as America now became the dominant global power?
This was the tricky part, Steve, because as you say, America was not just becoming the dominant global power, but was basically taking the place of the British Empire. In 1941, when Eisenhower first met Winston Churchill, this was December, the British Empire, then technically it was a commonwealth, but still acted like an empire, controlled about 1/4 of the world. And Eisenhower was a lonely brigadier general in the planning section. He was a brigadier with no brigade. And so from 1941 until 1953, when Churchill was back as prime minister at number 10 Downing in London, and Eisenhower was moving into the White House, there had been a huge, tremendous shift, a tectonic shift between America and Britain. America was rapidly had become the world's biggest economic power for a long time, and had become the greatest military power. But by this point, America was beginning to move into places that Britain had felt were its own. So places like Iran and other parts of the Middle East, places like the Far East, like Korea or French Indochina. America began to assert its prerogatives. It hadn't fully gone into places like Vietnam yet, but it was sort of taking over. It was painful for Winston Churchill to watch. He told his wife, it pains me to see America growing so much more powerful than us. But what can you do when you're looking at a country with 3 times our population? So that was the big change for the two of them, and they had changes in their political views. Ike was not the malleable, friendly general who kept out of politics. He was, by his presidency, he was plunged deep in the middle of politics. But notwithstanding, they maintained a personal friendship that was built on things like humor. It was built on their shared love of painting. It was built on their love of conversation. Obviously, it was built on their shared experiences in the pressure cooker of World War II. And because of that, they were able to communicate as friends about things that were policy matters. And they could be very open and honest, and they trusted one another.
The Cold War introduced an entirely new kind of conflict. How did Eisenhower and Churchill approach this new world compared to World War II?
Wow. Well, remember Churchill, and the big foe at that point was obviously communism. Communism in the Soviet Union under Joseph Stalin had replaced Adolf Hitler's Third Reich as the great foe. And Churchill had, before the war, been a great proponent of communism. He was the one who wanted to strangle Bolshevism in its cradle. And as the war came closer to the defeat of Germany, Churchill was very worried at the advance of the Red Army across Eastern and then into Central Europe. So Churchill became the Cold War hawk once again. He was the guy who who was always pushing for a way to stop or push back what he would call the Iron Curtain in his famous speech in Fulton, Missouri in 1946. But there were so that was the way he went into the Cold War. And Eisenhower, for his part, thought we could get along with the Soviets just as well as we got along with the British. This would be at the end of the war, late 1945. They both changed their minds when they got deep into the Cold War. When Ike became president, he became a hawk, very, very hard line, very much opposed to communism. He was running as a Republican in the McCarthy era. And so he had to show that he was strong on his willingness to stand up against the communists. Churchill was an anti-communist and literally felt like we should be using our atomic bombs to force Stalin out of Eastern Europe. But then two things changed his mind. And these would turn abruptly in a very short space of time. Churchill, from being a Cold War hawk into the great proponent of peace negotiations and a summit. And those two things were the explosion of the hydrogen bomb by the United States in November 1952. The hydrogen bomb, it's sort of hard to look at a picture of Hiroshima, that big mushroom cloud, and realize how much bigger a hydrogen bomb is. But our first attempt at blowing up a hydrogen device created an explosion, the equivalent of 700 atomic bombs going off all at once, 700 Hiroshima bombs. And that was just the start, because it actually takes 2 atomic bombs to get the hydrogen bomb working. So it was a massive explosion. And Churchill saw that the hydrogen bomb took us from being able to destroy cities to being able potentially to destroy humanity. And Churchill would remark that with the H-bomb, we are now as far from the era of the atomic bomb as the atomic bomb was from the bow and arrow. And that ability to look at future trends and see in bright colors what that would do to humanity terrified Churchill, and it made him look for a way to find peace. The other great event that changed Churchill was the death of Joseph Stalin in 1953. Stalin had been the boogeyman that comes out at night and steals countries from the free world to Churchill and many others. Churchill was one who subscribed to the great man theory of history. He felt that great leaders could negotiate among themselves. And if he couldn't negotiate with Stalin, now that Stalin was gone, perhaps the leaders among his successors would negotiate with us, and we could find a way to settle our differences. Eisenhower, for his part, was not only a Cold War hawk, but he was an organization man. And he felt that if you pull a piece out of a machine, you're just going to replace it with another piece, and the machine is going to keep going on the way it was before. And so it is with the Soviet government. Stalin was gone, but they were still fundamentally communist. They still fundamentally subscribed to Lenin's view of the inevitability of a communist overthrow of the capitalist world. So Eisenhower did not want to take the approach of, let's have a summit meeting among great men. Instead, Ike went in the opposite direction, and he said, we will build up such an immense arsenal of nuclear weapons, thermonuclear weapons, that we will be able to keep the peace that way. We will be able to credibly threaten massive retaliation against the Soviet Union if they attempt to attack us, and that's how we will keep the peace. It was a very different approach that the two men were taking, and they found themselves arguing quite a lot, very vehemently, over whether to trust the Soviets through negotiations.
John Meacham calls this book a moving portrait of one of the 20th century's most important relationships. What do you hope readers ultimately take away from this story?
I think the big takeaway is that you can maintain a close friendship. You can admire someone even if you disagree with them on political things, even if you disagree over policies. Ike and Winston are two classic case studies of men who were able to share a sense of humor and to share their friendship and their memories, and never let politics get in the way of that. And I think since for a long time, and more so since 2007 when the iPhone was launched, with all its benefits and all its troublesome qualities, we found it harder as a people to realize that you don't have to agree with everything someone says to still admire them or even love them. And agreement is good, but the ability to disagree and still maintain a friendship that is lasting is more important.
Yeah. This is an extraordinary work of history that reminds us great events are often shaped not only by strategy and politics, but by trust, friendship, and shared purpose. The book is Ike and Winston, World War, Cold War, and an Extraordinary Friendship. The author is Jonathan Jordan. Jonathan, thank you for joining me.
Thanks, Steve. It's been terrific being with you here today.
Thank you. Same here. And don't forget to subscribe to the Speaking of Writers podcast on Spotify, YouTube, Apple, and wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Steve Richards. Thanks for watching and for listening. I'll talk to you again next time.